How are you thinking about what the ECB did, and how should we view stocks through that prism?
Well, good morning. Well, of course, the market is always very volatile around central bank announcements. We're used to that with the Fed. On FOMC day, the market's always all over the place. But I think what yesterday showed is that the ECB basically over-delivered in every way. I mean, it's actually going to pay banks to lend money out. But yet the market seized on one little thing about maybe this is the last rate cut. And it just shows you how nervous the market is about how much longer central banks can keep stimulating things. And I think part of the decline we saw a month or two ago was about that sort of that end game, is like how negative can rates get, at what point does it backfire? And so I think the market is kind of looking almost to the exit, saying, you know, where is this going to end? And ultimately, what the ECB and the Bank of Japan and the PBOC do are obviously very important, but the most important central bank is still the Fed. And I think now we're going to go back to what is the Fed going to do and when, because what the Fed does relative to what Europe and Japan do sets the tone for the dollar. And when the dollar goes up, liquidity conditions tighten, and when the dollar falls, liquidity conditions ease. And the dollar has fallen, which is why the markets have rallied, because it's allowed financial conditions to ease up. So that's the sort of the lens through which I'm looking at this.
Okay, Urian, let's talk about a couple of things, because there have been two camps of people. One that negative interest rates don't work, and this is stupid, and we don't care what the central banks are doing. And there's been that camp of people saying that's what explains yesterday. However, I like what you just said, which is, first of all, we were worried yesterday because the ECB suggested this could be the end of cuts. And I think it's more that traders are really addicted to this free money at this idea. They loved what they initially heard. The sell-off came when it sounded like the ECB could be wrapping things up. But now, as you said, they're looking forward to the Fed. And what the ECB did yesterday was enough to keep the Fed on hold and keep them from tightening, at least for a little while longer. So now that idea of the free money being around for a while, at least no tightening coming, maybe that's what's picking things up today?
Yeah, so in Japan, we all remember a few weeks ago when the Bank of Japan went to NERP, there was a big backfire in the markets, because basically they're killing the banking model in Japan. You know, the banks have to pay to have excess reserves at the BOJ, but they can't pass that through to their consumers. And I think what happened in Europe yesterday was that the ECB is trying to keep the banks going, right? So it's paying them to lend money. But in Europe, where the cycle is maybe 2-3 years behind the U.S. cycle, there is really not a lot of demand for credit, and also the banks there are not as healthy as they are in the U.S. You know, capital ratios are a little different. So it's a little bit of a pushing on a string phenomenon. And so I do think there's this sense like, okay, what else is left? And of course, what else is left is to tie monetary with fiscal, which is what Mario Draghi has been saying for a number of years now. But in Europe, that seems to be hard to do.
As a stock investor, if we could, what if it's more sinister? What if it's when you just talked about Japan goes to negative interest rates and the yen surges? That is not what they wanted to happen. That is not what was expected to happen. The ECB does what it does yesterday. I don't care what Mario Draghi, that one little sentence or whatever, the euro is higher than when he started. That is not what was supposed to happen. That is not what he wanted. What if the markets are telling us that it's just not, they realize it's just not going to work anymore, their efficacy is kaput, and that's got to have some kind of implication for the Fed and for how you invest in the stock market?
Yes. So the way I look at it, for the U.S. at least, you know, the U.S. economy is doing fine, certainly on the consumption side. We have this global trade recession, of course, which has weighed down the energy and material sectors. But underlying it all, the U.S. economy is in decent shape, but we're living in a global economy. So the Fed, of course, has been trying to lift rates now for a while. It tried in September, it didn't work. Then in December, they went ahead. Then, now in March, they're not going to go. And then maybe in June, although the market's not really pricing that in. I think for investors, it's important to remember that this liquidity tide that came in from 09 to 15 is receding, but that the fundamentals are still okay.
So you would tell people to buy, even though we've come back so much from off the lows. You'd still tell people to buy.
I think for investors who are invested, they should stay invested.